Chapter 9: Climate Change, Migration, and Circular Economy. Introduction. Climate change has consequences not only for the environment but also for human populations. According to data from the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, IDMC, more than 376 million people globally have been forcibly displaced by various environmental crises or factors, floods, droughts, earthquakes, since 2008, with a new record of 32.6 million in 2022 alone. W can observe that the internal displacement is much more concerning or common in regions that do not have good urban planning, poor infrastructure, and have a high exposure to climate hazards, meaning that droughts, monsoons, typhoons, and cyclones are much easier to experience in East Asia and the Pacific, 31%, South Asia, 39%, or in Sub-Saharan Africa, 22%, than in Europe and Central Asia or Middle East and North Africa. Since 2020, the number of people displaced by disasters has increased annually by an average of 41% compared to the previous decade. The Institute for Economics and Peace, EIP, warns that, in a worst-case scenario, up to 1.2 billion people could be displaced by 2050 due to natural disasters and other environmental threats. APOP and Harju, 2023. While most climate-related displacements occur within national borders, allowing some individuals to return home after a disaster, the intensifying effects of climate change are rendering certain areas increasingly uninhabitable, making return much more difficult. Jakarta, the old capital of Indonesia, is a perfect example of climate-induced displacement caused by severe flooding, rising sea levels, and land subsidence. Jakarta is one of the fastest sinking cities in the world, with some northern areas subsiding up to 28 centimeters per year, and with 40% of the city being below sea level, Rinaldi, 2022. This is caused by the actions of humans in excessive groundwater extraction, as there is no proper infrastructure for a reliable piped water system, together with other questionable and temporary actions, accelerating the effects of climate change. The government has announced that the capital will be repositioned to a new city to be built on Borneo, on land that is now forest. A major challenge in addressing climate-induced displacement is the lack of a universally recognized legal definition and an established framework to provide protection and support at the global, regional, and national levels. The 1951 Refugee Convention, the most widely recognized international legal framework for refugees, defines who qualifies as a refugee, outlines the legal protections, assistance, and social rights they are entitled to, and specifies their obligations toward host countries. Bergeron, 2023. According to the convention, a refugee is defined as someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. United Nations, 1951. This definition, which many nations and regions have used as their foundation to develop a legal framework related to refugees, leaves much to be desired regarding refugees shaken by climate change and its consequences. This definition does not include environmental factors, meaning those displaced by climate change do not qualify for refugee status under the current international law. The only exception is where the climate change consequences have caused destabilization. It also only talks about refugees who need to move from one country to another, when the majority of climate refugees do not go to another country. Still, they move from one part of their own country to another. In the case of migration, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration of 2018 does acknowledge climate change as a driver of migration, stating the need to cooperate to identify, develop, and strengthen solutions for migrants compelled to leave their countries of origin due to slow-onset natural disasters, the adverse effects of climate change, and environmental degradation, including by devising planned relocation and visa options in cases where adaptation in or return to their country of origin is not possible. United Nations 2018, Objective 5, Section H. It also differentiates between slow-onset climate effects and sudden-onset disasters, which is the differentiation between migration and refugees in the majority of cases, as slow-onset climate effects are supposed to be easier to manage, but still, both can produce climate-induced displacements. The compact highlights three major climate-related migration factors: slow-onset climate effects, e.g., rising sea levels, desertification, and water scarcity; sudden onset disasters, e.g., hurricanes and floods; and loss of livelihoods due to environmental degradation. It encourages international cooperation to develop adaptation strategies and legal pathways for affected populations, but does not grant climate migrants formal refugee status. This, however, does not hold any legal power or importance, and also does not create a common definition. The situation where these climate-induced displacements appear is so much more complex than any other type of situation, causing migration or forced displacement. For example, the Cancun Agreement on Climate Change Adaptation, a legally binding document, identified three types of climate change-induced movements: displacement, migration, and planned relocation. Environmental Migration Portal 2020. Thus, the definition must be general enough to cover the complex situation of these people, which the current global framework does not comply with. The European Union's situation. Similarly to the global level, there is no specific definition nor legal framework to grant protection status to climate-displaced people at the regional level for the EU. The Common European Asylum System, CEAS, is based on the 1951 Refugee Convention, meaning it does not cover climate refugees. As mentioned before, climate-induced displacements do not qualify for refugee status under EU law unless they can prove some kind of persecution based on the criteria. There is no specific legal framework that grants protection status to climate-displaced people. However, some policies and legal tools indirectly address climate-induced migration. The Qualification Directive 2011/95/EU allows for subsidiary protection. This protection is for people who do not meet the refugee definition but still face serious harm if returned to their country. This could technically apply to people fleeing their homes because of extreme climate disasters if they can prove returning would expose them to inhumane or degrading treatment, as specified in Chapter 5. Qualification for Subsidiary Protection, Article 15, Serious Harm, Bast and de Oliveira 2024. Thus, it is rarely granted for environmental reasons only. Several countries have temporary protection in disaster situations for people fleeing natural disasters, but it is not a common occurrence for it to be used. Finland and Sweden were once among the few countries that recognized the growing reality of climate-induced displacement and incorporated it into their legal frameworks. Through their respective alien acts, they provided a pathway for protection to individuals who could no longer return to their home countries due to environmental disasters. These measures represented an important, if limited, acknowledgement that climate change is not only an environmental crisis, but a deeply human one that forces people to leave behind their homes, lands, and often their entire way of life. In Finland, this provision allowed for temporary residence permits to be granted on humanitarian grounds to those affected by environmental catastrophes. However, in 2016, this clause was removed, marking a step back in the recognition of climate-related vulnerability. Sweden, too, had included similar protections in its legislation, but these were suspended in 2016 and later fully repealed in 2021. Today, neither country maintains a specific legal mechanism to protect individuals displaced solely due to environmental or climate-related reasons. While both nations continue to offer asylum and subsidiary protection under more traditional criteria, such as persecution based on race, religion, or political opinion, climate displacement rarely fits within these categories. As a result, many people facing unlivable conditions caused by droughts, rising sea levels, or extreme weather events are left without meaningful legal protection. Issues in finding a common definition. There has been an open debate about this topic since the 80s, with Assam El-Hinawi defining environmental refugees as those people who have been forced to leave their traditional habitat temporarily or permanently because of marked environmental disruption, natural and/or triggered by people, that jeopardized their existence and/or seriously affected the quality of their life. International Organization for Migration, 2017. One of the biggest challenges in protecting people displaced by climate change is the difficulty of defining the term climate refugee. This is because it needs to fit within existing refugee laws and past discussions about environmental refugees. To this, we must add the fact that in many cases, slow-onset environmental change and sudden-onset natural hazards do not only happen due to climate issues, but because of a combination of factors. As mentioned by the International Organization for Migration, IOM, people are forced to leave their homes or choose to migrate for two main reasons. Exposed or expect to be exposed to a sudden-onset natural hazard or slow-onset environmental change, and lack the resilience to withstand impacts. This can happen for many political or socio-economic reasons, not only issued directly by climate or environmental reasons. Thus, finding a definition where all of these different aspects seem like an impossible mission. As compared to the impacts of the natural hazard itself, demographic, social, economic, institutional, and political factors contribute as much as, and sometimes even more, to whether affected people will be able to stay or have to move. International Organization for Migration, 2017. Furthermore, the majority of climate-induced displacements happen internally, which makes it different from other forced displacements. While migration can still happen within the borders of only one country, the common occurrence is that it stays within the borders of the state. Ideas and recommendations. Born from this necessity, there have been several organizations and states that have tried to create at least a common definition broad enough to include those affected by this phenomenon. For example, the Environmental Immigration Portal, EIP, together with the IOM, developed a broad working definition for environmental migration, as a general definition is normally prone to be accepted by a majority of nations, and it also makes it easier for victims to enter inside its protection, and in the organization's own words, seek to capture the complexity of issues at stake. The definition is as follows. Environmental migrants are persons or groups of persons who, predominantly for reasons of sudden or progressive change in the environment that adversely affects their lives or living conditions, are obliged to leave their habitual homes, or choose to do so either temporarily or permanently, and who move either within their country or abroad. Environmental migration, IOM, UN migration. Environmental Migration Portal, 2020. The IOM has also provided several recommendations to prevent and minimize displacement, considering the multi-causal nature of disaster-related displacements. To mitigate displacement risks, policy measures should focus on reducing vulnerability and enhancing resilience through the implementation of disaster risk reduction (DRR) strategies, e.g., early warning systems and infrastructure development, in accordance with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, 2015 to 2030. To this add climate adaptation measures to help people stay in their homes as long as possible. They also emphasize the necessity of facilitating migration when remaining in place is no longer viable, advocating for the establishment of legal migration pathways to enable individuals to relocate before a crisis unfolds. This includes the expansion of regional labor mobility agreements and the implementation of planned relocation strategies as a measure of last resort, ensuring the preservation of dignity and the protection of human rights. For instance, New Zealand's climate refugee visa proposal seeks to create legal avenues for Pacific Islanders displaced by rising sea levels. In the majority of cases, individuals are displaced within their national borders due to natural disasters or environmental degradation. In such instances, protection falls under domestic legislation and international frameworks such as the United Nations Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement and the Kampala Convention, 2009. These cases underscore the urgent need to further develop comprehensive frameworks for the protection of disaster-induced internally displaced persons, IDPs. Following Cyclone Idai in 2019, Mozambique, with the support of national authorities and international organizations, provided temporary shelter to thousands of displaced individuals, adhering to established IDP protection frameworks. As previously discussed, most individuals displaced across international borders due to climate-related causes do not qualify as refugees under existing international law. Consequently, the adoption of temporary protection mechanisms, such as humanitarian visas and non-refoulement policies during periods of crisis, is vital. These measures serve to safeguard those affected by environmental disasters. After the 2010 Haiti earthquake, for example, Brazil introduced a special humanitarian visa program to allow Haitian nationals to enter the country legally and regularize their status in recognition of the ongoing humanitarian emergency. Similarly, the United States granted temporary protected status, TPS, to Haitian citizens, enabling them to remain and work legally during the crisis. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, further underscores the importance of enhancing international cooperation through the establishment of bilateral free movement agreements, such as those under the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and the development of regional consultative processes on migration. This multidimensional approach integrates disaster preparedness, legal migration mechanisms, and international protection standards, aiming not only to safeguard displaced populations, but also to strengthen governance, international collaboration, and infrastructure resilience. Additionally, the Nansen Initiative, a state-led consultative process launched in 2012 by the governments of Switzerland and Norway, evolved in 2016 into the Platform on Disaster Displacement, PDD. The initiative was born from the recognition that current international legal frameworks do not guarantee the admission or protection of individuals forced to cross borders due to disasters. It thus sought to develop a protection agenda with the following objectives. 1. To enhance cooperation among states in addressing cross-border disaster displacement. 2. To establish guidelines for the admission, stay, and legal status of affected individuals. And 3. To clarify the roles, responsibilities, and funding mechanisms for both humanitarian and development actors. The Nansen Initiative specifically addresses disaster-induced cross-border displacement and adopts the United Nations definition of a disaster: a severe disruption to the functioning of a community or society, resulting in extensive human, material, economic, or environmental losses that exceed the community's capacity to respond using its own resources. Rather than conceptualizing a disaster as a singular event, the focus is placed on its consequences, particularly the diminished coping capacity of those affected. This perspective is essential in addressing both sudden onset disasters, such as floods, windstorms, earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions, and slow onset disasters, including droughts, desertification, sea level rise, salinization, and thawing permafrost. Although the concept of slow-onset disasters may initially appear inconsistent with traditional understandings of disasters as abrupt events, it aligns with the broader understanding that disasters involve a progressive erosion of resilience over time. While the Nansen Initiative offers a definition of disaster that includes environmental loss, it does not yet provide a universally accepted definition of climate-induced displacement. Although the Nansen Initiative does not establish a formal or universally recognized definition of climate-induced displacement, it plays a critical role in addressing the protection gaps faced by individuals displaced across borders due to disasters, including those linked to climate change. Rather than focusing on definitional debates, the initiative offers a non-binding yet influential framework, the Protection Agenda, which provides states and relevant actors with practical guidance to enhance the protection of affected populations. This framework encourages the development of national and regional responses that ensure the admission, stay, and legal status of displaced individuals, even in the absence of eligibility under the 1951 Refugee Convention. By fostering international cooperation and promoting measures such as humanitarian visas, temporary protection, and planned relocation, the Nansen Initiative enables states to respond effectively to disaster-induced displacement and reinforces the importance of preparedness, dignity, and human rights in these contexts. The impact of the circular economy on climate-induced displacements. The circular economy, directly or indirectly, has an essential role in increasing the quality of life and thus reducing climate-induced displacements, especially if we focus on slow-onset displacements rather than sudden-onset displacements. The easiest way to recognize the impact is through examples that illustrate the reality. For starters, we have, as the Index 3 indicates, the top 10 main destinations of waste from the EU. Index 3, Top 10 Main Destinations of Waste from the EU, 2021, million tons. Turkey 14.7, India 2.4, Egypt 1.9, Switzerland 1.7, United Kingdom 1.5, Norway 1.4, Pakistan 1.3, Indonesia 1,1, United States 0.9, Morocco 0.6. We can observe that countries like India, Turkey, or Egypt could benefit significantly from applying circular economy principles in their policies, whether through public or private initiatives. For example, in India, companies such as Code Effort and Thales focus on the concept of the 3 Rs: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Code Effort produces toys, paper, and decorative items from cigarette waste, as explained in this informative video. The first and only cigarette waste management company in India has recycled more than 500 million cigarette butts since they began operations in September of 2018. Asia featured 2022. Another example from India is Thales, a company that focuses on the production of footwear. Each one of their Y2K Pro sneakers contains 10 plastic bags and 12 bottles. Similarly, Sri Regna focuses on the recycling of polyester for the textile industry, which is one of the most contaminating industries in the world. Following these kinds of practices allows the environment to heal and makes it easier to maintain cleaner countries with much less waste. Examples: Code Effort. Thales, building on the concept that circular economy principles can both reduce environmental damage and increase the quality of life. It's important to highlight how these practices are not only relevant to industrialized nations, but are also being applied innovatively in regions particularly vulnerable to climate impacts, such as sub-Saharan Africa. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, ECA, emphasizes that circular economy practices enhance the resilience of communities and economies by promoting regenerative and restorative practices. United Nations 2025. This resilience becomes vital in times of multiple crises, including resource shortages, economic shocks, and environmental degradation. In sub-Saharan Africa, these crises are often felt through slow-onset climate events, such as prolonged droughts, soil degradation, and water scarcity, which can displace populations over time due to the collapse of agricultural systems and livelihoods. One powerful example of how circular economy principles are being applied to fight land degradation and support food security is the use of zai pits in Burkina Faso. These small holes, traditionally dug into hardened soil, are filled with organic matter such as compost or manure. They capture rainwater and concentrate nutrients around the root zone of crops, which revives degraded land and significantly boosts agricultural yields, even during dry periods. This practice is not new. It comes from indigenous knowledge systems, but it has been adapted and scaled up as a climate-resilient agroecological technique. The widespread use of zai pits, along with stone buns and agroforestry, has helped reverse desertification, reduce rural exodus, and enhance food sovereignty, all of which contribute to reducing the need for climate-related displacement. Thus, the circular economy is not limited to high-tech recycling systems or green startups. Danjuma and Mohammed, 2015. It is also about regenerative practices rooted in local knowledge that strengthen communities' autonomy, resource efficiency, and long-term resilience. While not located in sub-Saharan Africa, Israel presents an effective example of how circular economy principles can be applied in water management to enhance resilience to climate-induced challenges, particularly droughts, which are a frequent occurrence in the region. Israel has adopted a national strategy centered around water recycling and efficient usage. 87% of its wastewater is treated and reused, primarily for agricultural purposes. The highest rate of water reuse in the world, Fluence's News Team 2020. This approach not only reduces the environmental impact of wastewater discharge, but also alleviates pressure on freshwater resources, allowing the country to maintain food production even during periods of extreme water scarcity. This system is supported by advanced technologies such as drip irrigation, which was pioneered in Israel and allows for precise water delivery to plant roots, minimizing waste. Israel's case demonstrates that strategic investments in infrastructure, innovation, and policy alignment can transform a climate-vulnerable region into a model of water resilience. Such an example is particularly relevant when considering slow-onset climate events like droughts, which often lead to the displacement of communities that are dependent on agriculture. Thus, we can see that the circular economy can be useful directly in combating climate change and indirectly helping to reduce climate-induced displacements, but it is not the only thing that is needed. A legal framework together with a common definition must be developed that includes climate-induced displacement broad enough that each nation can apply it to their situation, as the majority of cases happen within national borders.